Service in the U.S. Army Air Force as a radio operator in B-29 bombers from April of 1944 to March of 1945. He's going to use an old leather-bound diary, historical internet information that came from internet sites, and black and white photographs to retrace this incredible journey and give you guys a fantastic story of history and family tonight. So please welcome up Charles Carmona.
Thank you. There we go. The drum roll. Welcome, everyone, here in person and online. This is a story, as I was introduced, of my father's service in the U.S. Army Air Force during April of 1944 to March of 1945. He was a technical sergeant, was his rank, and he was a radio operator in B-29 bombers based in India. So I'll talk about him and I'll refer to him this evening, but also it's sort of the whole everyone. It wasn't only him, of course. He was a member of an 11-man crew whenever they were flying, and it's a story about all of the people who served in World War II. So the first image is a picture of him, and next to him is the diary on which I am basing this presentation. And this is a U.S. Army Air Force issued diary. It's leather bound, and it's kind of tattered. It's fallen apart, but I found it after he had passed away, and he never really showed it to me, so it was new to me, and it's such a treasure of information. There are actually 346 days that are logged in here, and pretty much every day he made a notation. It's an official military diary that was handed out to everyone. I don't know if every service member filled it in every day, but he pretty much did. So Al Carmona was born in Chicago, Illinois, in April of 1918, the first child of my grandparents, his parents, who had immigrated as teenagers from Turkey in the early 1900s. He graduated from high school in Chicago and spent 2 years at the University of Illinois in Champaign-Urbana. He left before graduating and worked odd jobs until he enlisted in the Army Air Force in March of 1941. His first posting, as I remember him telling me, was in a unit guarding the Panama Canal against potential invasion by German and or Japanese forces. So this would have been probably 1942 and 43. His exact service dates and locations were lost, and they weren't retrieved. I wasn't able to retrieve them from the personnel files maintained by the military. So I'll show what I have a little bit later. After all of this was new to me because he never really talked about it, and he passed away in 2002. He was 84 years old, and I was going through his personal effects and found this diary that I've referred to, which chronicles 11 months of his service while stationed in India. He'd never shown it to me before and rarely talked about his experiences, but tonight traces basically page by page his 11 months in India. The picture that we see now on the screen is one of his military pictures sometime during his enlistment. He has some service bars over his shoulder, but I don't know the exact date of that. And then the picture in front of the plane, the name of the plane is King Size. It shows him squatting down in the first row with a little arrow up from him. This was his the 11-man crew that would fly on B-52 bombers, B-29 bombers. Sorry. So inside the front cover of the diary shows that he began recording his daily activities from April 1st, 1944. And it has the list of his of the crew members, which shows that the 11-man crew had a pilot and a co-pilot, and engineer and navigator and 2 radio operators. He was one of the radio operators, and 4 gunners, machine gunners. On the right-hand side is the warning, the caution. All members of the Armed Forces of the United States are cautioned not to record herein any information which might be of value to any enemy of the United States should this diary fall into the hands of enemy agents. So I guess every member in the service was issued one of these, and I don't know if every one of them kept a day-to-day log, but basically Al Carmona, my father, did. Then you've got his dog tags there on in the upper right, and then 2 images. There wasn't any information about it, but I assume that the one on the left was at some kind of a temporary camp. It seems like a tent camp maybe along the way before they got to their permanent station in India. And then the other one shows 5 crew members under the wing of an airplane. So this is what the diary looks like. A lot of scribbling in there. You see in the beginning, almost every day he gave a complete recollection of his day. And there were 346 days total. And on the right of this image is the transcriptions that I did so that it was easier to read. Now, all of this is contained in a folio that I've put together, and I can send the link to it to anyone who wants it. This is what it looks like. It comes a total of 77 pages, including the colored maps that I created, and we'll see those coming up. So I'll be referring to the folio as well as the diary throughout the talk. So this first pages, again, starting from April the 1st is when he made his first log, talks about when they were assembled in Illinois and ready to take off to go to their first posting, their next posting in India. And it talks about the leaving from Chanute Field in Illinois, and then going on to Wright-Patterson Field in Ohio, and then Presque Isle Airfield in Maine, onto Gander, Newfoundland, and across to across the Atlantic. So this is a map that I've created on Google Earth, which traces his first legs, and the legends below are connections to internet sites that I cross-referenced to his handwritten notes. This shows starting from the Chicago area, going to Presque Isle, Maine, and just coincidentally, my wife Betty, who is here tonight, and her sister Ethel were both born very close to. It's in Aroostook County, Maine. It's the most northeastern airport in the U.S., and that's where they were born. So a little bit of coincidence there. Aroostook County, Maine. And then they flew on to Gander, Newfoundland, and then from there they crossed the Atlantic. Now, each of these air bases existed before, but they were pretty much turned into transport areas during World War II. After 6 days in transit, they arrived in Marrakesh, Morocco. At this time, it was sort of a colony under control of France, and it was another airport used for cargo and transiting aircraft across from the U.S. into the theaters in Africa during World War II. 2 days later, they flew on to Cairo, Egypt. His notes in the diary don't say exactly which base they were staying at, but it did say that they visited, they were in Cairo for 4 days. I do have a story about Cairo, but I'll give it individually because it's kind of a family story about Cairo. Maybe later I can talk about it. Now, what was happening in World War II at this time? This was April of 1944, and it was towards the end of the war. The German and Italian forces had taken over much of North Africa, led by General Rommel, but they had been stopped and pushed back by the British forces led by General Montgomery. The Allied forces in July of 1943 invaded Sicily, and then eventually the Italian mainland in September of 1943. So the tide of the war was going in the direction of the Allies. In Asia and in the Pacific, the Japanese were meeting strong resistance from U.S. and British forces, and their progress was slowing. And I'll continue with updates as we continue. From Egypt, they headed further east, stopping in Karachi, which was part of British India. India was a colony of Great Britain at the time. They didn't get their independence until 1948. And their final destination was in eastern India near Calcutta. This is just some cross-references from Wikipedia about the various bases that they stopped in and verified his notes. That's what I wanted to do. I looked at his notes and I saw some names, and then I went to the internet to see what that they had to say, and it was just amazing. Almost every one of his notes I was able to reference to somewhere on the internet. Here is the map that is showing their progress from Morocco in Western Africa through Cairo, and then on to Karachi in British India, and finally to near Calcutta. I'm having a problem moving. Oh. Okay, so they arrived in India to their base, PR Doba, and this screenshot is from an Indian historical website that is midnapuri.in, and it talks about the history of India during World War II, and specifically about the PR Doba Air Base. PR Doba was one of 4 bases that were given over to the American B-29 bomber squadrons in British India to fight the war in Asia and the East Indies. Al Carmona's group was the 462nd Bombardment Group with 4 squadrons and part of the 20th Bomber Command. In order to reach Japan and other targeted countries, the group needed to stage operations from a forward airfield in China. This PR Doba in India was kind of the safe base, and they would carry their supplies to China and stage most of their bombing raids out of China. And that was in central, let me, no, okay. I've got a map coming up. In order to reach Japan and the other countries, the group needed to stage operations from this forward base in China, which was 1,200 miles away. From Piardoba, they had to fly daily flights to supply the forward base in China. Almost immediately upon arrival in India, the B-29 superfortresses were grounded due to engine fires because they weren't designed to operate in very hot climate. And in India, it was over 100 degrees on many days. So they had to make modifications to the planes so that they could fly them. So let's talk a little bit about the B-29 bombers. The Boeing B-29 Superfortress bomber was flown during World War II and the Korean War. It was designed for high-altitude strategic bombing as well as low-altitude incendiary bombing and for dropping naval mines. It was designed with then state-of-the-art technology, including pressurized cabins, tricycle landing gear, and an analog computer-controlled machine gun firing system. There were, at the Boeing factory in Kansas, in Wichita, Kansas, they made a total of 3,970 B-29 bombers over a period of years. So the plane is on the top of this image, and in the middle is a mock-up of the cockpit with a dummy acting as the nose gunner, and flanked by the pilot and co-pilot. And then the lower image is the radio consoles where Al Carmona and the other radio man would have sat, keeping communications going. So these flights were sometimes a dozen hours and longer, so they always had to have two people there just to spell them, that they were up in the air that long, and it wasn't just a job for one person. Okay. So what was Flying the Hump? That's the title of the talk tonight. And it was, Flying the Hump was the nickname given by Allied pilots for the airlift operation that crossed the Himalaya foothills into China to supply the forces fighting Japan. It was the U.S. Air Force most dangerous route, but it was the only way to supply the Chinese forces. According to this article and many other articles, there were more than 1,000 men and 600 planes were lost over the 530 miles of rugged terrain. Only a small number of the airmen survived their crashes and the time spent in the Japanese prison camps. As the supply mission for the Chinese forces fighting the Japanese, the airlift from India to China originally began in 1942, and every day for years, for several years, they were flying between Piardoba in India, over the Hump, over the foothills of the Himalayas into China to supply the forces that were fighting the Japanese. It's an incredible history. It's not as well known. This was called the China-Burma-India Theater, as all of the fighting was happening in Europe, but it's an amazing history, and I encourage anyone to look it up themselves if they're interested. During this period, this campaign, the 20th Bomber Command lost 125 B-29s, mostly due to adverse weather conditions. Of those, only 30 were lost to Japanese defensive actions, according to Wikipedia. Oh, this map on the right, if you can see it, it's dated 1941, and it shows the dark red line was where the Japanese had advanced. And so you see in the lower left is India, and they would fly over the mountains to their forward base in China, and from there they would send the bombing missions into the areas that Japan had invaded on mainland Asia. All right. Their arrival in India at PR Doba was April 30th, 1944, but their first flight over the Hump, one of their first supply runs, wasn't until May 9th. So that's about 10 days. Their first leg of almost every mission started from India, went to the forward base in China, and then they would refuel and stock up on the munitions, and from there they would fly to their targets in towards the northeast. And the distance from PR Doba in India to Chonglai in China was 1,200 miles. That's like flying from LAX to Dallas. So this is on the supply missions. They might have flown that several times a day, certainly many times a week, to supply the forward base. That 1,200 miles over the Himalaya mountains. I mean, to fly from LAX to Dallas, you go over the Sierras and you go over the Rocky Mountains, maybe a little bit, but the Himalayas were twice as high as those. So it was, and the weather was horrible. And they lost an incredible number of planes and personnel flying over the Hump. Here's a picture from Life magazine. For those of you who aren't familiar with that, it was a weekly magazine that was one of the most popular in the U.S. And this is from 1944. I'll read the captions that are from the Life magazine war correspondent. On the left, it says, a B-29 at Chinese base revs huge 16-foot propellers to take off. It is a unit of the 20th Air Force. So these pictures, my father had cut out of the Life magazine and saved them, and he'd shown them to me before I remembered. And then on the right, the image on the right, the caption, again, written by the Life magazine war correspondent, bomber crews are briefed at a Chinese field before a raid. They sit informally under a tree for instructions. The group commander standing told them, "This is just another little cruise problem with 3 or 4 minutes of work at the end. There will be bacon and eggs when you land." And so if you can see on the right of the group there on the photo on the right, there's a little arrow that points to Al Carmona wearing a safari hat. He showed me that, and because he was famous. It was his first little bit of fame, having shown up in a Life magazine photograph. Okay, their first bombing mission, they'd been in India already 6 weeks, but this was their first bombing mission. From his handwritten diary of June 15th, I quote, arrived at advanced base in China, took off at 17:15 local time on our first mission to bomb Yawata, Japan, Imperial Iron and Steel Works. Mission successful. Had fuel transfer trouble, which Boyer straightened. Tail turret malfunction. Right gunner turret malfunction. After the first hour of flight, had a bit of engine trouble, which was cleared up in flight. His next day, a handwritten entry said, returned from mission after being in the air for 15 hours and 20 minutes. flak holes in the left wing and AA bullets through horizontal and vertical stabilizers. This was not just a little jaunt from LAX to Dallas. They were shot at, and there are, I believe there was like 10% of the planes never made it back over the period of the time during the China-Burma-India theater. It was dangerous. You didn't know if you were going to be coming back. The Wikipedia entry on the right of this states that of the 75 B-29s in this raid, 5 were lost in accidents and 2 were destroyed by Japanese aircraft. So that's 10% didn't make it back to base. This screenshot on the right of the screen is from Wikipedia again, and it's basically confirming everything that Al Carmona had written in his diary. The dates and the times, and here we have some pictures of B-29s flying in formation. Remember, there were many dozens, if not hundreds, that would fly at the same time to go to a mission. And someone took this picture from the window of one. There wasn't any explanation, but if you can imagine flying, you're sort of like, I don't know if you could say a flock of geese or a swarm of bumblebees, 100 B-29 bombers flying for 9 or 10 hours straight to get to their target. To the right, at the top, is a picture of Al Carmona standing in one of the planes that he flew. He flew, you'll see a list, in 22 different planes. The name of this plane was With Malice Toward Some. And then the lower 2 images are presumed, there wasn't any any explanation really, but they were when they were on leave. The lower left, he's in some famous arch in Calcutta, and on the right, he's with 2 of his buddies pretending like they're killing a tiger. Maybe it was at a museum in Calcutta or something like that. Okay, so here we have the next mission that he wrote about. First, across the top of this Google Earth map are all the, during the week, they would just fly back and forth between Piardoba in India into Chiang Mai in China to supply the forward base with fuel and munitions and spare parts, because that's where they left on from their bombing missions to from that forward base in Chiang Mai, China. So this this image now that we have here was their second bombing mission after they had arrived in India. It was titled Operation Boomerang, with the targets of oil refining facilities in the Dutch West Indies, which is now called Indonesia. Their forward, they didn't fly through China on this one because they were heading to the southeast instead of the northeast. On this one, they went through British Ceylon, which is now called Sri Lanka, and there was a British base there called Trincomalee, and that's where they stopped to refuel and pick up munitions, and then they flew on to Palembang in Indonesia to bomb the oil refining facilities that were supporting the Japanese military. Up until this point, this was the longest mission in World War II history, bombing mission, a total flying time of 18 hours and 31 minutes. After this run, they went back to Ceylon, and they were in Ceylon for 12 days repairing the engines before they could fly again back to Piardoba. So an update for World War II. They were already into August of 1944. So what was happening in Europe? Rome was liberated on June the 4th, 1944. June the 6th was the D-Day invasion on the shores of Normandy in France. The tide had turned in Europe, and the Allied forces were on the march. Paris was liberated in August on August 20th, 1944. And I'm sure that Al Carmona and his crew got this news, and they were very excited about doing their best to finish the work in the China, Burma, India theater. In the Pacific, the Battle of Saipan was in June of 1944, and this was a significant battle that turned the tide against the Japanese. So the next mission, according to Al Carmona's notes, left September 5th to take out the Xinjiang Railroad in central China. I didn't find any corroborating information online about this one, but the Xinjiang was built decades before, and the Japanese had used it for their war effort, so the Allied bombers had to take it out. And then moving on, from October of 1944 through January of 1945, the crew flew 4 missions to bomb targets in Japanese-occupied Formosa, which is now called Taiwan. According to the listing in Wikipedia, some of these were in conjunction with other American commands that had formed that were coming from the Philippines after the Philippines was liberated from the Japanese in late of October of 1944. So they were bombing Formosa from India and China, and also from the Philippines, but as well as the American bombers, there were squadrons from the Chinese Air Force, the Indian Air Force, and the Soviet Air Forces also contributed to the raids on Formosa. So just as a note, tonight, October 10th, 80 years ago tonight, in 1944, Al Carmona and his crew members were weathered in at Forward Base Chiang Lai for 4 days. They just sat around doing nothing, according to his handwritten notes, until the weather cleared. Okay. The diary notes that on October 24th, another mission left Piardoba via Chiang Lai to bomb Omura, Japan. This is confirmed in the Wikipedia entry on the right of this, of the Google Earth map. The Wikipedia confirms that the 20th Bomber Command raids destroyed the city's aircraft factory, followed by another bombing on November 11th, and which was noted in the diary as well. Further runs on Omura were on November 21st with 61 B-29s, December 19th with 17 B-29s, and January 6th, 1945 with 28 B-29s. Their next bombing mission was to Singapore. And Singapore was captured and held by the Japanese starting in 1942. The Wikipedia entry states that there were 11 bombing raids against the Singapore's naval base and dockyard facilities, as well as mine-laying missions in nearby waters. The crew left on their first mission. There were 2 missions to Singapore. Their first mission was on November 6th, and another one on February 2nd. And they flew nonstop without refueling in China. These missions were 1,820 miles each way, a total of 18 and a half hours of flying nonstop with their crew of 11. After the first flight, on November 6th, 2 planes went down in the ocean, and according to Al's notes, his crew got in a plane to fly out and try to find them, a search and rescue, but they were not successful. Okay, so moving on. The diary lists 3 bombing missions to Bangkok, Thailand on November 27th, December 14th, 44 and January 4th, 1945, to destroy the port and railways, which were being used extensively by the Japanese. These, again, were nonstop flights from Piardoba to Bangkok, Thailand, 1,130 miles each way. So it was just a little bit short of L.A. to Dallas, maybe to Austin, if you know your geography in Texas. The next notations in the diary were December 2nd, December 7th, and December 21st. Bombing raids to Mukden, China, via forward base Changlai. The vertical press release from Associated Press states that a substantial force of superfortresses attacked industrial targets in broad daylight. The press release below, dated December 7th, says that 108 B-29s bombed Manchuria Airplane Manufacturing Company and an adjacent arsenal. 2 weeks later, on December 21st, 49 B-29s left to bomb more targets around Mukden. 2 were lost on that mission. Again, there about 10% didn't make it back on these missions. According to the notes, that seems to be the average. On these particular missions to Mukden, the 2 planes that were lost, in total, 85 crew members died, while 14 survived their bailouts but were captured by the Japanese military, and they were kept as prisoners of war until August of 1945, when they were liberated. There's a single mission on January 6th to Nanking, noted in Al Carmona's diary, but I found no corroborating information on that. I'll just take his word for it that they did it. And then what turned out to be his last bombing mission in this assignment, Al Carmona wrote that on February 7th, 1945, the crew left to bomb Saigon in French Indo-China, now Vietnam. The Wikipedia entry notes that this was one of the last missions in the Operation Matterhorn, which was this whole overall operation of bombing from India into China, using B-29s from various bases in Asia, and it lasted over a year. Basically, Al Carmona's assignment to Piardoba was Operation Matterhorn. So that was his last bombing mission. And here I've done a Google Earth map overlaying all of the missions that he flew in the 10.5 months. And you can see the nexus is Piardoba, and then the flights going to the northeast went through Changlai, and the flights going to the southeast were, in most cases, direct flights. And then on the right of this screen is all of the missions that he flew, as well as some of the supply missions. From what I understand of this list, it seems that he and his crew actually went on 40 bombing missions during the 10.5 months that they were there, plus dozens of supply missions, and they were in the air a total of 446 hours in flight during that time period. The last page on the lower right lists the names of the 22 different planes that he flew in. Some of the names were King Size, Miss Lace, Wild Hare, Cocksure, Hobo Queen, Man of War, and many other equally inspiring names. So here we go back to a couple of views of the entries. All of a sudden, February 6th, 1945, the entry says, rumored that some crews may go home now soon. Next day, rumors getting stronger. Next day, heard that I may go home and a list of rotation eligibles to be posted tomorrow. Next day, my crew and Cush's crew are to go home. 3 days later, working on the ship. When do we leave? 3 days after that, maybe we leave tomorrow. Next day, maybe we leave tomorrow for sure. February 26th, left Piardoba at 800 hours in Karachi shortly after noon. So they're on their way home. February 27th, 1945, 0200 hours, took off from Karachi for Khartoum, Sudan. Arrived Khartoum early in the afternoon. Next day, going to take off for Accra, Ghana. Arrived Accra early in the afternoon. And so those are his entries there that we see. And here we have the map of him flying from India, from Piardoba, to Karachi, and then from Karachi to Khartoum, Sudan, and then from Khartoum, Sudan to Accra, Ghana on the west coast of Africa. And and he mentions in his book, again, the names of the air bases, and they are verified in Wikipedia and other sources. So from Accra, Ghana, they flew back across the Atlantic to Natal, Brazil, and then on to Georgetown, British Guyana, and eventually to Palm Beach, Florida. Now, each of these were also staging areas for World War II, and they were winding down. The Natal, Brazil, housed between 3,000 and 5,000 U.S. military during World War II, less so in British Guyana, and Morrison Field in Palm Beach, which is now Palm Beach International Airport, was a training and staging base for the Allied invasion of France, including D-Day and Normandy. Almost home, Al Carmona's last flight was from Florida to Fort Bliss near El Paso, Texas on May 8th. Fort Bliss, of course, is a very famous base, and it was a training base. It was established during World War II, so he arrived on May 8th, and the next day he got on a train for a 2-day ride back to Chicago, where his furlough began. So Al kept in touch with his crewmates a little bit, through his membership in the Veterans of Foreign Wars, but he wasn't active in the group. Over the years, he went to various reunions, including this 50th anniversary of the crew's first bombing mission over Yawata in Japan. And the numbers across the bottom, I don't know if you can read them, but basically it was 68 planes that went out and 7 did not return. So it was another example of 10% of the people that went out on these missions didn't come back. It was really the ultimate sacrifice. So right here in front of me, and I'll show it to the people online as well, is a collection that he made of his service medals, not all of them, but some of them, and they include okay, thank you. The Distinguished Flying Cross, Asiatic Pacific Campaign Medal, U.S. Army Air Force Air Medal, American Campaign Medal, American Defense Service Medal, World War II Victory Medal, China World War II War Service Medal, and 2 unit shoulder patches. Thank you. So, thank you, Lance. And you're welcome to come and look at this, and I have a description of each of the medals also. This pretty much closes my story about Al Carmona's 11-month U.S. Army Air Force service based in India. Here he is, the fourth from the right, at ease, posing at ease with his crew from Rush Order, the name of this plane, which was number 17 on the list of 22 planes that he flew in. So in doing my research for this presentation, I requested his records from the National Personnel Records Center in St. Louis, Missouri. They sent me a copy of his discharge, his honorable discharge, but also an apology letter saying that the rest of his records had been destroyed in a fire at the Personnel Records Center in 1973. And that's so sad. Many of the service members who served had their records were destroyed in this fire in 1973 at a record center. So his discharge shows that after his furlough in Chicago from being in India, he was reassigned to Muroc, California, which is now Edwards Air Force Base in the Mojave Desert. And from there, he took his separation from the U.S. Army Air Force on June 15th, 1945. Now, June 15, 1945, that was pretty much, it was very close to the end of the war. The Axis forces had retreated from their defeats, and Iwo Jima was recaptured in the Pacific. Hitler killed himself at the end of April 1945, and the atomic bombs would be dropped on Japan in August of 1945. So here's a picture of Al Carmona and his family, taken early in his career. He's on the right in the light colored uniform. And on the second to the left is his brother Maury in the Navy cap, the white Navy cap. Maury joined the Navy. He's just a year or two younger than Al, and served in England and Scotland. In the middle is or next to Al is his sister, Fran. Fran didn't actually join the military, but she was a lab technician in a hospital in Chicago and cared for returning troops during the war. In the middle is Al Carmona's youngest brother, Eddie, with his fiancée, Shirley. And Eddie, right out of high school, he went to... Eddie's son, my cousin Wayne, is here tonight. We were talking about it before. He was in ROTC in high school, and immediately after high school, he joined the Air Force and trained as a gunner. But the war was over, so he didn't serve overseas. And then on the far left is my grandfather, Isaac, and then in the polka dot dress is my grandmother, Fortuné. Then at the bottom is their dog. I don't know what the dog's name was, but I call it Spot. So presumably, I need to put in a plug about immigrant families. This was a typical immigrant family in the early to middle of the 20th century. Isaac came as a teenager from Turkey, fleeing war and persecution, looking for a better life, and leaving his parents behind. He never saw them again. Fortuné was 8 years younger and arrived similarly at Ellis Island around 1916 with just carrying her few belongings in a small suitcase. They didn't speak any English. They worked hard. They went to Chicago. Both of them went to Chicago. They met in Chicago and got married and had 4 children. all of whom all of the children served in one capacity or another, defending America during World War II. Isaac worked in a metal stamping factory and rose to supervisor before retiring after 40 years. Fortuné was a seamstress and supplemented the family's income. They eventually bought a house on the west side of Chicago, living in the top 2 floors and renting out the basement to help with the mortgage payments. I can categorically say that they were not criminals, they were not rapists, they were not murderers, and they didn't eat their neighbors' cats. Even though maybe Spot chased the cats around. So, what did Al do with the rest of his life? He was out when he was 26 years old, out of the military, separating from the Air Force in Southern California. He stayed and found work in the budding aviation industry. He eventually hired on at the Civil Aviation Administration, now the FAA, and trained as an air traffic controller. He married my mother in 1948, and I was born the next year. His first assignment in the FAA in 1950 was a 1-year stint in Hanksville, Utah, population almost 200. A dusty emergency landing field out in the middle of nowhere. Now, after riding years in planes, sitting in front of radio consoles, Al Carmona really wanted to be a pilot and eventually got his private license. And so his private pilot license. He and his 3 co-workers in Hanksville bought a plane so that they could fly up to Green River, the closest city, a big city, it had population almost 1,000. So in the upper right corner, upper left, is a picture of my mother holding me in 1951 in front of our plane. So, hey, we had our own airplane in 1951, even though we shared it with 3 other guys. Al Carmona eventually rose to the ranks at the FAA, learning the newest technologies as they were adapted for the air traffic control field. And on the left, you'll see that in the middle there is a scene of all these IBM mainframes from the 1960s that ran the air traffic control system for the country. And then eventually, and then on the lower left is a scene from the scopes that they would watch and track planes in the FAA. This was the environment in which they worked as air traffic controllers. He eventually got his commercial pilot license as well, since his duties in the FAA required that he fly familiarization trips at least twice a year in the 3rd seat of the cockpit of commercial flights. So the FAA had a mandatory retirement at age 55, but because he was in a supervisory position, he was allowed to work until he was 57. He retired at age 57 in 1975, and he was at a GS-14 grade, which to the military is comparable to lieutenant colonel. So what did he want to do next with his life at age 57? He said he always wanted to be a doctor. So he went back to community college for 2 years and became a respiratory therapist. And so here he is on the right in his medical uniform, and he just loved it when people called him Dr. Carmona. Thank you. And thank you.
Did you want to take questions from the audience at all? Are there any questions that people want to
ask? I want to read this last slide, which you can't really see here. It says, thanks to Al Carmona and all others who have served our country in the military or similar public services. And if anybody wants a file on the PowerPoint or on the folio that I put together, send me an email. My email is there, cicarmona@gmail, and I will provide you with that file via email. And if you want to print it out into the folio, the FedEx store costs about $40, charges about $40 to do it. Thank you very much.
Okay, great. So I have a quick, are there any comments or questions from the audience that we have? Did you have something?
I wanted you to tell the story about Cairo, when he was in Cairo.
Okay, in Cairo, when he landed in Cairo, and so he went to his commanding officer and he said, "Sir, I'd like to take leave to visit my grandmother." And so as the story goes, the commanding officer said, "Yeah, sure, your grandmother lives here in Cairo." And so, in fact, she did. And the quick story on that was that the family was in Turkey, in Istanbul, and my grandmother had 2 sisters. There were 3 girls, and her father was a merchant marine, and he sailed out around the Mediterranean. He'd go out for months at a time on a ship, and one time he just didn't come back, and so my grandmother's mother was a widow, and she eventually met another man who was Egyptian, and after the girls were sort of grown up, at least in teenagers, she moved to Egypt to live with her second husband, where she had a 4th daughter. And so that's when Al Carmona landed in Cairo in April of 1944, he was visiting his grandmother for the first time and visiting his aunt who was his age.
Great story. Any other questions or comments?
Bob? Charles, I'm not that familiar with the Turkish language, but where did Carmona come from?
We are Sephardic Jews. And when the Jews were expelled from Spain in 1492, they scattered around the Mediterranean. So it's a Spanish name, and they kept their Spanish language, sort of an antique Spanish language, and that's what my grandmother, 500 years later, still spoke to me. And so I speak Spanish. She was always correcting me, saying that I didn't speak Spanish properly.
Got a couple over here.
Charles, on the return trip home, I assume they left their B-29s in the theater and took another cargo plane home, or were they flying home in the B-29? And also, did he write in his diary on what they did on Liberty? Because most 25-year-old military people I know want to drink some beer and meet some local ladies.
The first question about how did they fly home, I believe they flew their aircraft home. It's in here in the diary. It didn't specifically say that, but I believe that they were preparing. One of the last entries was we're fixing the planes and ready to go home. So as far as on leave, yes, he did a lot of entries of what they did. I mean, there was things like watching movies. That they would, I guess, set up a big screen like this in the camp and do a movie. I don't know if did they have USO tours at that time? It was very structured. They got their leave, and I'm sure they had restrictions about where they could go for their leave.
Any other questions?
So you mentioned Life magazine was his first brush with fame. Were there subsequent brushes with fame?
He was a real quiet guy. He didn't really look for I would say, I can't think of any.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
So, Charles, I was recently in Hanksville, and there's lots of dinosaur bones around that area. It's really well known. Did he ever do any dinosaur bone hunting?
He never told me about that, but what he did tell me is that they would go out looking for uranium, and they had Geiger counters, because apparently if they were able to identify a source of uranium, they would get paid for that. So if that makes any sense.
I'm Brother Mike. Dad used to talk about taking his 22 rifle into the diamond mines, the industrial diamond mines, and shoot off chunks of diamonds. And that his rifle is dated 1890, by the way.
I don't know if you heard that question. I never heard that. It was something about that. I'm in the diamond business now, and I don't think there's any diamond mines in Utah. Maybe they're quartz mines that people often confuse with that. Or topaz. There you go. Topaz in Utah. Maybe that's what it was.
Okay, well, Charles, thank you for a great presentation. Let's give him a round of applause.
All right, Charles, you know the drill. Meet me at the map here. Okay. Stand right over there. Yeah, don't get ahead of yourself here. Expressing grateful appreciation to Charles Carmona for the interesting, informative, and entertaining program. Flying over the Hump the evening of Thursday, October 10th, 2024. Thus furthering the objectives of promoting the exchange and dissemination of knowledge between those about adventure